Okay, so I ended off the last video almost talking about how um, there are several reasons why we have to understand a postmodern world and how to understand and identify our identity in that kind of context. And I alluded to that a little bit by saying sometimes people will ask us how to do something, and we don't want to give almost like a traditional way of teaching how. Like we can say, this is what I learned, and these are the people who I learned with, and this is why I believe that they are an authoritative source. Because, and then you say, because this is who I have become after doing this. So it's almost like following that methodology, as it were. Like before in the past, when I think about fasting, it was if you want to build muscle, then this is what you have to do. And we've studied enough experiments, we've studied enough groups of people who want to volunteer, um, following a certain kind of practice of exercises. And when they do that, we notice that this is what their body does. So now we have enough evidence to show that this works. So if I was to say, I am somebody who likes to study psychology. So I like to understand the different behaviors that we have as humans that help us learn certain things and help us unlearn certain things. Because sometimes we're parented or we're socialized in a way that we think that what we know is normal. And then we go to school and we study something and then we find out, oh, actually, if I continue thinking in this way, I might actually harm somebody or harm myself. So I have to think about a new way of behaving in the world. So because I like studying that and because I like studying how children develop, and a lot of the sciences, so like chemistry, physics, biology, a little bit of the math. So I have like a very broad understanding of all the different kinds of subjects that we can study in the world, but I didn't study one in a very, very big way. So it's almost to say it's very hard for me to focus on one thing. I just like to take little bits and pieces from every kind of subject and try to fit them all together. And and then I went back into tradition. So like back when Jesus was born, like 2000 years ago, and I didn't really study much from that point forward, but I know that in the world that we live in, everything is almost based on when he was born. Some of it is from before he was born, but a lot of it is after he was born. And after he was born, we know that by about 700 years, the prophet was born. And then I love to study that because in it, it's basically the closest time that we have where there was an archangel in the world who gave us examples of the best way to live to make ourselves happy. So these are what I like to learn, and this is why. And now the people that we live with today, some of them are like me. They like to study that. And some of them have studied with this teacher and this teacher and this teacher. And if you trace who their teachers were, a lot of them will go right back to the actual prophet. And if you go to this place in Arabia, you're going to find that's where he's buried. So if you think about following all of this back to Adam, it's almost like, wow, that's pretty cool. And then you're like, I want to go try that. That's different than me saying, this is what I did. And now you go do it. And you're probably going to get the same results. You could be like, oh, okay, cool. That's a good idea. And someone else will be like, okay, well, I mean, that worked for you, but maybe it's not going to work for me because maybe my history is a little bit different. Maybe I came from India and I didn't study when Jesus was born. I studied before he was born. So I have to go back more than 2000 years ago. So my tradition is going to be a little bit different. Maybe I'll come back and study what Jesus did, but for now, I maybe need to study what happened in India, right? And that's perfectly normal. That's actually what I'm trying to encourage because it's hard to know what one person's actually going to identify with as a hobby and an interest. And that's going to be kind of that resonance and kind of gratifying meaning for them. So I'm going to go back to the story of Adam. Not everybody believes that creation story. Some people believe in the Big Bang. And actually in the Quran, it actually mentions that that could have been a thing. Because there's a verse that says, people who try to cover how to understand the universe might not do that on purpose, but if they do, they can try to think about how maybe the earth and the heaven were just almost like attached to each other, right? Like think of sometimes if you're peeling a sticker, it's almost really hard, and you're just like, I don't even think this is a sticker, and you're like, you keep pulling and pulling and pulling, and then sometimes you're like, maybe if I cut it, and then you cut it, and you're like, oh, here's a piece, and then you try. So that's what God's saying. He's like, the earth and the heaven were almost like that. So if you think of the galaxy, and you pull your, if you have like something in the satellite up in the sky, like a satellite that pulls really, 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 really far away from the Earth and just keeps pulling back like this view, and then lets you see this is the galaxy, the Milky Way, and all you see is usually this really big ball of light, and then around it all these stars, and then as you get closer, you start to see a little bit more stars, and then finally you see the sun, which is a star, and then you finally see, oh, here's our little solar system, right? So you think, oh my gosh, we're really tiny, like in this huge big picture, like where's God? So sometimes it's better to just think inside of you and then like into the core of the earth. That way you're not kind of losing yourself out in like space. So if you think of that story, it still works. People call it the Big Bang. Some people call it evolution. There's a lot of different ways of thinking about this without saying that one of them is absolutely wrong or absolutely right. The more we progress through time, the more we think, you know what, these kind of all overlap in different ways. And maybe that's why we want to think about like postmodernism. Like we want to think about this idea of everybody has to identify the meaning that resonates for them. And that's it. That's how they build their unique identity. So I'm going to assume that I'm Adam right now and I'm just created. And I believe this story because, well, here I am. I just woke up and I sneezed and then I was like, ah, that felt good. I can breathe. And then you're looking around and then you're kind of like, I'm kind of bored. Like there's nothing to do. Like there's angels. They're just hanging out, kind of like just existing in light and almost who knows what they're saying that sounds like God is great or God, glory be to God, whatever it is they're saying. And I'm like, I can do that too. But because I think I'm like, is that all I have to do? And then God that says, no, you know what? I'm going to create somebody who can talk with you. That's going to think kind of like the way you think. Like I'm bored. So then God says, in our body, if you think of this is called the torso, right? So it's almost like if you take off your arms and that trunk that almost holds all our organs, it has that rib cage. So it has these bones that are called the ribs, and they're formed in a way that when we breathe, they expand and they contract. So they, even though they're made of bone, the bone doesn't move very easily, but between the bones is this thing called like a ligament, which sometimes if you eat chicken, especially like the drumstick, you find that kind of sticky part, or kind of like it almost feels like it could be crunchy, right? It's kind of like gummy bears, but it's crunchier. And if some people like to eat that, some people don't, that's fine. But anyway, that's what that is. It's very flexible in your body and it helps you move in very flexible ways without causing pain or like breaking anything. So what we need that rib cage for is it helps keep everything together that are organs. So like our heart, our lungs, our liver, our kidneys, everything has to kind of stay in place. And that rib cage almost holds it together and protects it. So if you think about what the bone is. We talked about before that the bone has something inside of it that has this genetic material that basically has a history of all the things that we can become because it has a history of what we were. Now God says, I created Adam from earth. So it's almost like God just created the earth from the earth, like just all this sand and the sand that we know or like clay, it has the minerals in it that are almost can be used to make metal. So it's almost like we're kind of a really cool creation, like when you think about it. I'm going to let you think of it on your own in all the different ways that you want to. But anyway, we basically have like limitless potential if you think of it from any kind of perspective. And then God says, in that rib that I'm kind of trying to explain that it's part of your bones, he thought, I'm going to create a woman. So it's almost to say the woman's going to have kind of the same genetic material as a man, but a little bit different. And that's how he created Eve. So the idea was that if we think about Play-Doh and you think about like a cookie cutter of a person that's shaped like a person, and then you think you don't really see the rib. So it's just a flat person. And then you have a rib, which is kind of like a hook almost. So you almost think of a cane. You can think of that. Like if you actually pull a rib and try to make it straight, it'll break. And so it's almost to say, we are almost created to think about the ways that we're supposed to be different and accept that difference rather than try to make everybody look the same. And it's not to say that the men are better or the women are better, or that men only think in one way and they can't be flexible, or that women are always just like flexible and not ever able to maybe think in a focused way. But it's just to give different examples of visualizing something so that you can think about, well, what if I am a man, like, or I want to think like a man so I can maybe understand how to relate to a man. Like, what is it about the way you were created that maybe I need to think about as a woman that I'm created a little bit differently? And now we're not trying to judge or compare each other in a mean way. We're just trying to understand, like, I really want to understand something about you so that we're not always fighting, for example. So I talked about, so why, for example, maybe people are hesitant to almost teach one specific thing and almost explain how they learned something, and then someone can try to understand okay, I'll think about maybe the way I want to learn based on what you told me. And then they'll go and do the research and they'll figure things out. Now, sometimes this is a very big job and you almost don't really know how. So you almost want to build some friends that will almost have the same goal and they'll want to build with you. And this is how friendships build. And then sometimes people decide that I really like the way you think and I want to spend more time with you. And then they want to get married, which means they want to spend almost like all their life together and they want to do it in a way that doesn't create ways for other people to intervene and almost love them in a way that might um, pull other couples apart, right? So if I decide, I went to school and I met somebody who I like the way they think and they think a lot like me, so I don't think we'll have problems in the future. Um, Maybe we should get married, right? So then that means that other people know now that these two people love each other in a specific way, that other people shouldn't love them too and expect them to love them back in that way because their heart's already kind of busy with somebody else. So in this way, you can understand why sometimes people have divorces because they love somebody for a very long time and then they decide that, you know what, we don't have the same goals anymore. And I think I'm meeting somebody who might have more goals similar to who like I want to become. Like I want to build new goals now and maybe you don't want to share those goals with me. So is it okay if we have a divorce and then I could get to know somebody else? And that's healthy. That's really normal because it's better to do that than to stay in a relationship that makes both people not happy. And then like what's the point of that? You're trying to build a life that makes you happy. So sometimes it's very difficult. Like it can be a very short term or maybe kind of like a medium long term disappointment or sadness. But if you think about the long term, like why you made this choice, it's because in the long term, I know it's going to be a better choice for me. And people usually take a very long time to think about how to like break these relationships and start over. And it's okay to kind of accept that. So I'm going to think about a story about Romeo and Juliet that we all know, or we maybe take for granted that we all know. But anyway, if you think of the cartoon, I think it's called Gnomeo and Juliet, where they have these little creatures that are garden gnomes and they come to life and they almost kind of give a story that's similar to the one that was written by Shakespeare a long time ago. And in it, it's very hard to understand like what happened that led to this. But anyway, there are two families that do not get along at all. So they've had a very long time of not getting along. It's called a feud because they almost don't even remember why they're angry at each other. It's almost like we just have this dogma, as it were, that we just have to stay mad and we're never allowed to get along. So when you think about what the universe is doing, the universe is actually putting a challenge to say this is not healthy and it has to stop. So what it did was it brought two of the kids, like from one family a boy and from one family a girl. So Romeo and Juliet, and it tried to make them love each other from both families. And so when the families found out, they're like, no, no, you're not allowed. We do not get along. And the boy and the girl, they were just like, we don't care. And they're trying to get along and try to get like each other and get to learn about each other. Because when the heart loves something, it's really hard to change its mind. Like you can know this because sometimes you can convince yourself that no, I'm not going to listen to my heart. But then your mind actually shuts down and it just gets sad and it depresses itself. And then your heart's just like, yeah, I win. And it doesn't really win because it's just sad. So now we know the power of the heart and that sometimes denying your heart in a very unhealthy way is not healthy for anybody. So what happened is the the story goes on that I'm actually not going to end the story for you because it's a sad ending, but I'm going to try to look for a hopeful new beginning. I'm going to give an example instead. So let's pretend that Juliet has a dad who comes from a very strict family. So he says it's very important for a woman to behave in this way, and he says, I want her to stay at home. I want her to learn how to cook. And then the boy's dad, Romeo, he thinks the same way. But then now that Romeo and Juliet want to be friends, he's going to say, no, no, I think the girl should go and she should go learn how to learn, like she has to go to school and she has to learn how to find a job. So he's already giving reasons, even though he may be not originally thinking that way. He's now thinking of new ways to tell Romeo that, no, 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 she's not somebody that you want to marry because you're not going to get along. So now he's almost creating new goals for Juliet to be like, okay, fine, I want to do that. I want to do that so I can get to know Romeo. But then now Romeo's dad's like, oh wait, no wait, I didn't really mean that. I actually don't really care. Like I just don't want you guys to get married because the families are never gonna get along. So now everyone's like probably confused and like, oh my gosh, what are we gonna do? So you can come back to the present day where sometimes this is actually what happens, is that certain parents want their kids to behave in a certain way because they think that this is going to be what's going to make the kids happy with another person. Now think about that. If I have a kid and I think, um, so I'm going to assume that I am a dad who is maybe thinking, I'm from a culture in Egypt, so I live in Canada right now. But what I remember is that in Egypt, typically, men want to marry a woman who has gone to school, who understands how the world works, and knows how to almost stand up for herself and can therefore get a job and can therefore know how to kind of live in this society, one that's kind of civilized. So now that I'm here in Canada, I assume, well, that's probably the same thing in Canada. So now I'm going to think, if I have kids, this is the way I'm going to help them understand how to live the world, how to live in the world, and that's going to help them kind of build a happy life. Now he has a daughter, and he decides, okay, I think this is the way this is the world works still. Now it's been maybe 20 years since he had that idea at the beginning, and maybe things have changed a little bit. We don't know. He doesn't know, maybe because kids that are younger, who are 20, they don't usually hang out with people who might be, 50 or 60. And like, how are they supposed to know, like, what is it that's kind of normal and what is that we like and what is that we don't like? So, this is where it's important for parents to sometimes stop the way they think and listen to the way their kids think and what's kind of normal, because 60 years is a long time. Like, I already talked about that story with the grandfather with the kids, and there's a 30-year gap, and it's almost like that's already too much. So the larger the gap, the harder it is to kind of relate to each other and understand, like, what I used to do when I was a kid is not going to be anywhere near what you like to do as a kid anymore, is it? And then from that way we can negotiate and we don't have these troubles that cause problems and cause conflicts and then people to not be able to get along and kind of like each other anymore. So now I want to think about how this girl, for example, who's 20, she wants to help her dad understand that, you know what, maybe I like girls. Maybe I don't want to marry a boy. But he doesn't believe that yet. What is he supposed to do? And what is she supposed to do? And what is the girl that likes her supposed to do? It's a very tricky question because it's like we all want to follow our heart. What's helping us decide? So think back to celebrities and how sometimes there are these rules and guidelines that they have to follow because this is what everyone in the world thinks we're supposed to do. So they're like, even if that's not what I believe, like that's not what I honestly think is going to be true for me and my heart. Like it doesn't make meaning for me. Why can't I change the way I think? And sometimes that becomes the problem. It's like, well, I don't know. Like, are people ready to think this way yet? And that's a very hard job because that's where you have to have courage and be that pioneer and be like, well, I want to try and I'm going to guess and I'm going to try anyway. And sometimes these movies, when they first come out, people who watch them don't like them. And they're like, why do they do that? And then the more they watch them, they're like, oh, wait, yeah, I guess so. And the best way to do that is to remember that people don't like change, first of all. So then you almost have to allow yourself that disappointment. Like, I have this really good idea, but I'm going to let myself get disappointed so that, by the time I try new things and then we talk about it and then people understand their emotions and why maybe they don't like an idea at first. And I mean, what if we change this and add this and remove this? Then eventually they might change their mind and then we won't feel so like disappointed about why something was the way it was, as a reception in the world. So let's think about, I don't really know. Let's think I'm a little bit older. So 20 years is sometimes a little bit too young for parents to kind of trust their kids. They're like, nah, you don't really know what you're doing yet. I don't really think that's fair. Like I talked about 10-year-olds being somebody who should be, getting used to being trusted and having their opinions and emotions validated. So let's think that a 10-year-old is watching and he says, I have an idea. Why don't we think about these new ideas in movies and talk about how all the different characters feel? Because that's something that we can all relate to. So let's pretend that there's a boy and a girl who, maybe there's two boys, maybe there's two girls. We call these gay and lesbian. And they want to have a romantic relationship with each other. And let's pretend they are from like a Muslim family. What would happen? And talk about their emotions. And then maybe talk about a Muslim family who it's a boy and a girl who are maybe 12 or 13, or maybe they're 25. And they had like a boy and a girl relationship and they got married, but then they got divorced. And talk about the emotions there. And then we can kind of compare like what happened that seemed like, but the ones that were 25, we thought they would be the ones that were happy. Like, why did they end up only being happy for a little bit of time, like a short-term pleasure? Why wasn't it sustainable? Why wasn't it a very long time? And then they can understand, okay, let's go backwards and see what we did with that 25-year-old family, and then see how these 10-year-olds would solve the problem. So they're going to think, okay, they're going to really want to. They're going to say, now we have ways to negotiate. Like, look, mom, look, dad. Like, we know in the past with Romeo and Juliet, when parents said no, they ended up, well, they ended up not having a very happy ending. And just like this couple, they tried, and that's okay because they're still pretty young. 25 is pretty young still. You can, decide we're not going to continue this relationship and we're going to try new friends or family to live with for a little bit until we decide we want to try a new relationship again. And that's very healthy. That's a very normal way of living in the world. But now the younger kids have something to learn. They're going to say, well, what we understood from the past was always listening to what parents think is healthy for a relationship is important to listen to and to consider when you're trying to make a decision. But it might not always be right, because remember where inspiration and meaning comes from. It comes from one person's heart. And there's literally almost very, very small chance that anybody in the outside of your heart, basically. So there's no other heart that's going to be able to understand the meaning in your heart other than you. And sometimes you don't even know, and you need help from God. So, or like the universe, you're like, can you help me understand what this feeling is? And you're kind of sitting there and you're just like, and the only thing you can think to do is like, maybe I'll read a book and maybe I'll find somebody who has an emotion that almost resonates with what I'm feeling. And then I'll be able to put words to the way I feel. So the way I used to do this was, if I'm feeling really, really like frustrated, like I don't know why I'm feeling like there's nothing in the world that's giving me pleasure right now, and I'm like, what can I do? Like, do I need someone to talk to? Do I need to go out for a walk, fresh air? Do I need to read a book? And I can do all those things, but I only do it for like not even 5 minutes, and already I'm like, no, I don't. I'm bored. This isn't what I want. And that's it. You just almost have to let yourself try all these things until you're like, all right, I'm just gonna pray in my heart for a little bit, and then you fall asleep. Maybe you listen to music and you fall asleep. And then that's it. You just have to kind of let yourself have that pause. And even if it takes a day or two, and you just try to make the most of your day, like, oh, I have to still go to school, and maybe friends will wonder, and maybe they'll give me my space, and maybe eventually I'll be inspired and I'll feel better and I'll know what this emotion is that I need to kind of resolve that's going to help me feel better again. So knowing this is a really great way to respect people's unique identity, and also to help them not feel bad about that moment or of time where they pause, because some people sometimes assume unrealistically in it, like, which means in a very unfair way, that people have to be happy all the time. Imagine how difficult that is, because we already know about the nervous system that a lot of it's out of our control. Like, my nervous system is based on my history, and my history might have been one that was full of war. So I'm still having this material like in my mind and my body that feels sad. And it's because, well, in my history, there was war, and there are people that are used to feeling sad because they miss their family. And I can't just be happy about that and assume, like, I haven't thought about this to make sense that, yeah, I can eventually be happy. And I have to understand maybe ways to be in the world that help me problem solve without using violence. And then I have to understand, well, how do I do that? And I think, yeah, I have to learn to use words. And I have to understand diversity so that I can understand if something's very different from what I'm used to. I have to learn how to talk about it and how to understand that diversity is healthy. And then I can feel like now I can make a friend, and they don't have to be exactly the same way that I am. And it's actually maybe healthier if we're a little bit different, because then we can learn from each other. And all this takes so much time, and it takes so much work for us to convince our brain. So if we are used to thinking, like, our psychology is that everyone should be the same, I'm going to be very frustrated in the world, because I'm going to find almost nobody who's exactly like me. And if I try to find somebody who I'm trying to help them understand, be like me, they're going to be like, no, I want to be like me, you be like you. And then you're going to be even more frustrated, and you're going to be like, what do I not understand about the world? And that's actually a really good beginning, because then you can be like, I have to go find out. And I'm going to go to the library. I'm going to go find out, like, maybe I need to watch some movies. Maybe I need to watch like some TV shows, or I need to read a novel, like just fiction story that's kind of made up but kind of real. And it's going to tell me about, like, what are some of the troubles that kids go through? What are some of the troubles that parents go through with their kids? Because sometimes if you're reading older novels, novels made for adults, you can almost understand what it's like for a parent to have children that they don't really understand how to get along with. So then you can be like, oh, these are some of the troubles that are normal for kids to go through. It's not just me. Like all kids go through this. And this is maybe what helps parents understand. And then you can start to kind of problem solve and move forward from that regard. Now, the reason I'm thinking about this is because way back, I mentioned how sometimes the universe shifts in a way, and we can't really understand why, but we just wake up one day and it seems like the world's topsy-turvy. Nothing makes sense. And even though we might have had a lot of practice doing something that helps us build patience, um, for some reason, we find that our patience is gone. We get angry really, really quickly. And somebody that looks like they know how to be patient for some reason um, don't have that problem. Like they're still able to be patient, and I'm the one that's stuck getting angry. Like what happened to my patience? And then you might think maybe I'm going to think about this from a metaphysical point of view. So I'm going to pretend that God's trying to teach me something, or the universe is trying to teach me something, and I have to be like really careful with how I think now because I have to problem solve. So maybe they have a question, and I don't know, like what if they took my patience and I took their anger? And then you're like, I might want to be angry with them at first. And I can be like, what? Like, but it's not really in their control. It's not in my control. It's that their heart prayed for something and my heart prayed for something. And the universe or like angels are like, okay, you're going to have to find a way to problem solve. So you're actually not really going to want to be nice because nice is almost like you do your thing, I'll do my thing. And then that's it. We'll just move on. But then it's like, well, where's the problem solving? Like you're not learning anything from anybody. You're just actually just going to continue living in some kind of stuck way in the world. And it's almost like God's saying, you're welcome to choose. You can choose to figure out what words you want to use, how to kind of make a bridge so that they can kind of make a bridge and then you meet each other halfway. So if you're trying and they're trying and then eventually you're like, we can finally understand something together and then we'll try to kind of go back and forth with each other until we're like, oh, and then we both have new information and then we move forward. So in this way, it's not that you're being nice, really. You have to remember it's kindness because kindness means somebody's doing something that maybe you think um, isn't good, right? But you want to be nice anyway. So I guess that's the word. Is that you think I don't think you deserve that I be nice to you, but I'm going to anyway because I know that for me the universe is going to be charitable for me because I'm choosing to be charitable to you. And then it becomes maybe we don't know what deserve means because maybe they just haven't been having a really kind life and nobody has ever been nice to them. So they don't know how to be nice to people. So to say that you don't deserve that I be nice to you is almost unfair because it's like, who even knows what kind of life they had? So if you take the initiative and say, I'm going to kind of try to reach out and say, you know what? I've noticed that you're really patient about a lot of things in life. I used to be like that, but for some reason, a lot of things have been really frustrating me and I don't know how to fix that in myself. What do you do that doesn't frustrate you? And then you're going to find that they say, well, I don't really have anything that frustrates me. Like everything's really easy and I'm looking for a challenge. And then you can be like, oh, ooh. And then you think about something that you're really struggling with and now you have somebody to support you who's looking for a challenge. And then it's almost easier when you have somebody to help you because you can make mistakes together. You can laugh about it and then you can be like, oh, wait, we shouldn't try this yet because I know this really makes me angry and I have to work on my patience for a little bit. And then they can be like, okay, well, let's practice. And then you can practice something together. Well, they'll remind you like, wait, don't get angry. And then, you take turns. Well, you take a break because you're like, no, I can't. And they're like, okay, I'll do it. I'll do it. And then, in this way, it's really, really fun. And we almost take for granted that we can be that playful with each other, even as adults, because when we know that we can give each other breaks and almost make excuses for the way other people's learning styles are, then it's almost like it's a very collaborative and interactive way of understanding life. And you can think about how sometimes you can be reminded of this when you think about playful animals. So if you think of cats who chase a laser point, it looks really playful, but it looks like they actually want to fight with it. And that's the way our brain actually works. Like it almost looks like it's like fighting with itself, like this idea and then move it this way. And then another idea, kind of exactly like Inside Out. Like all these ideas are moving around and they almost light up in the brain in a way. And it's like trying to find out a solution. And then when it can't, it just like, okay, nope, time to take a break. And then you sleep. And then when you're sleeping, because the mind is that relaxed, it'll slow down and it'll kind of just wait. And that's maybe when the spirit moves and the soul moves and angels move around and who even knows what happens. And then you wake up and you're like, okay, I think I have an idea. And there you go. So, um, I think to build on that, we can almost wait and see um, why using words that are hurtful will maybe not be used very much anymore. Like I talked about how sometimes when I really get angry, I need those big words, and sometimes other people might might hear them and be like, "Wow, that's a really really like it's a very mean word." And then at the time you're like, "I don't even care," and you're just like Shrek or like just really angry. And you have to let yourself know that those emotions are okay. What's not okay is to actually find somebody who doesn't need to hear that and to shout at them, right? So this is where we have to find healthy ways to get angry. So sometimes people say like you can scream into your pillow or you can go to the gym and like get a punching bag so that way you're just like in your mind you're maybe venting that anger, but you also have your body um, using that energy because when we get angry, sometimes we have adrenaline, which is that excited emotion that helps us go to an adventure. But because it has stress with it, which is cortisol, um, it's usually kind of, it can become very violent. So we have to almost make sure that we're not actually punching somebody by accident or pushing someone in a mean way. And they're just like, the person walking by is like, what was that for? Right? So all these things help us know why an impulse is important to learn what it is in the like in our body, and then why practicing how to be patient is important. So when we have these moments of anger, we don't hurt ourselves or somebody else by accident, and then we're stuck in the universe like having to deal with, well, now I have to like fix this somehow. Like, what am I going to do in the universe to help myself? Like, almost say, sorry, can you help me? Like, don't make the angels leave me. So, I'm going to leave it there and help us almost wait through. Like, I always do this. I create an intention of giving myself time to almost think through ideas from one video to another so that I don't have them almost like all overlapping and almost seeming like the same idea, just segregated. But I don't know. It's ending up looking like it's kind of like a teaching style more than something that leaves enough gap for people to kind of create their own ideas. So I'm just going to go with it. It is what it is. I hope you guys find some benefit in this, and I'll see you next time.